Thanks everybody for joining us at today's meeting of the Des Moines-Ames Product Tank. We are very excited and pleased to have Andrea Saez joining us, talking about roadmaps. She's got a lot of experience, and I'll give her a chance to do a much more proper introduction of herself here in a minute. My name's Kent McDonald. I'll be hosting the discussion today. We're going to do a Q&A focused on roadmaps. So since we are going to have quite a few folks here, if you could stay on mute for most of the time, and if you have when you have questions, I should say, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that and kind of moderate those as we go through. Matt, anything else we want to say about ProductTank in general before we dive into it?
I don't think so. I think we have a lot of people that signed up or joined our meetup just to hear Andrea talk, or maybe they weren't in the Des Moines-Ames area, which is great. So, you know, who knows how much longer we'll be doing these only virtually, but Kent and I have discussed the idea that we could have a simultaneous virtual presence once we're doing this back in person again. It's really nice to be able to expand our speaker network and the people that are bringing ideas to just beyond the Des Moines-Ames area. So stay signed up or stay tuned if you'd like to continue joining in the future. We're always looking for topics and speakers, so reach out to myself or Kent if you have one.
All right, thanks, Matt. With that, like I said, for those that have just joined, we're going to go ahead and do a Q&A today on roadmaps. And first thing I want to do is to turn it over to Andrea to give her a chance to introduce herself, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Cool. Hey, everyone. So I'm Andrea. I started this week at Userpilot, so that is my new gig. But previously, I was at ProdPad for 6 years. For those that may not know, ProdPad is a road mapping and product management software. So basically, all I did all day was talk about roadmaps, create roadmaps, study roadmaps, talk to product manager about roadmaps. So roadmaps are essentially my life for 6 very long years. And I also managed the education side of ProdPad, and I managed it as a product with its own roadmap as well. And that's pretty much it.
So we'll definitely have to get into that very meta thing of having a roadmap for a roadmap tool at some point in time.
That's what we're here for.
So to start off with, and again, I encourage you, if you have specific questions about roadmaps, to go ahead and put them in chat, and I will work them in. I do have a couple of ones to start off with. So first question off the bat is when do you feel that a roadmap is critical to have for a team and an organization?
Always. It is always critical. So having a roadmap is really about defining a strategy and understanding what and why you are doing things. I think the idea of having a roadmap for a team is still quite new. It's something that I have experienced, and I can tell you from experience that I actually worked better having a roadmap and treating a team as a roadmap. And I wrote about that as well on the ProdPad blog. But if you have a product, if you have a service, you need a roadmap, because essentially otherwise you're just kind of trying things without direction. And having that roadmap will essentially establish a little bit of direction and just that understanding of why are we even doing things.
All right, great. So you're definitely an advocate of always having a roadmap, but we're curious, is there ever a time where a roadmap might just be a little bit dangerous?
If your roadmap is a timeline. If your roadmap looks like a timeline, you're starting in the wrong direction. Again, the purpose of having a roadmap is to communicate the what, the why, and how things tie back to your OKRs. And the timeline doesn't communicate that. I am a firm believer that timelines don't actually communicate anything in products. That might be a separate question for later, unless you want me to dig into that right now. But you have to understand and really keep in mind what the purpose for a product roadmap is, or just a roadmap in general, which is to focus on the strategic side of things. It's not to focus on the execution side of things.
So for those that are wondering, well, geez, my roadmap does have a timeline on it. How might they go about expressing that information and conveying that information differently?
Excellent question. So I think the first step, and for those that may or may not be familiar with the now, next, later concept, look at everything that you have committed resources to right now. So the things that are ongoing at this time. And those are the things that will essentially go on the now column. Timelines tend to be very output focused. So they're really focused on, like I said, how you're going to deliver things. But if you can take a step back from that and essentially go, okay, well, we have all these things that are ongoing right now. How can we group that into essentially initiatives that describe why we are doing this? So you may have 4 or 5 tasks or epics that relates to one particular project at this time. You would take that and then describe essentially why it is that you're doing it. So we have decided to do this because this will affect the business or will affect our customers in this way. And this is how we expect to reach success, or this is the outcome that we want to get to. And just right there, you've defined, your objective, your measurement of success, what you're doing, and why. And that would be essentially for the now column. Anything that comes after that, or potentially going into discovery after that, if you're agile or hopefully dual track agile, will then go into the next column. And then later is, those are the things that you don't even know what that might look like right now, but it's definitely, within scope or within the realm of things that you want to tackle at some point. I think you're muted. There you go.
I was in the chat box and it was just doing a lot of spaces there. Sorry about that, folks. We have a question come in. So, you're kind of talking through the various components that are in now, next, and future. Along with that, are there some must-have and must-not-have attributes of roadmaps? So you've mentioned one of them probably already, don't have timelines. What are some of the other things that you might want to incorporate in there that you expect to see have?
So, one thing that has worked really well for me is instead of jumping to the solution and say something like, okay, my initiative is we're going to build a Salesforce integration. That right there might set the wrong expectations, not just for anyone reading the roadmap, but perhaps also for your own team. So the expectation that you're going to build a Salesforce integration and not provide any more information might give the stakeholder a little bit of, I don't know if leeway is the right word, but a little bit of imagination about what that might look like. And so they're expecting something very specific. And that's a little bit dangerous. One thing that's really worked for me is to be able to really outline, in a detailed but also non-detailed way, to say, we are going to build a Salesforce integration in order to help our customer success team to be able to communicate, tasks between product A and product B. So you're not saying specifically in what you're doing, and you're not tying yourself to an output, but you're giving yourself room to experiment. Now, the more defined or the more research that you do, the more experimentation that you do, then the more defined that will get. And at that point, feel free to actually say specifically, if you want to, what you were doing. But generally, the way I like to work is everything on the now is, quite defined because I know what I'm doing. The stuff that is on the next might be something like, can we do this in order to affect Y? And then what's on the later will be something like, how might we even tackle this problem? So instead of, thinking ahead to the output, give yourself that space to actually understand what the problem is. And if you can frame everything in that question form, and focusing on what problem you're actually trying to solve, you're actually going to end up building something that's better at the end of the day.
All right. Thanks for answering that. Have a somewhat follow-up question, but I'm going to kind of steer in a little bit different direction. So as you're kind of determining what you're going to put on your roadmap, I presume that there's some thought given to who the audience is. And before I give you a chance to answer that, my question is should you show your roadmap to customers or people outside of your
Absolutely.
organization?
Absolutely, you should.
And do you show different information there than you would if it's for internal purposes?
Of course. So you can't have one roadmap for everybody, because the reality is people are going to have different levels of technical ability or understanding, or even just interest. So if you're presenting something to your board, they might care more about the objectives that you're working on and what the ROI is, because they care about money. They care about how it's affecting the business. If you're presenting something to your customers, they might care a little bit less about that, but they want to understand, the level of transparency that you have with them, what problems you're solving for them, and just the general direction so that they know what to expect from you. So yes, I'm a huge proponent of sharing the roadmap with stakeholders and with customers. But then if you're sharing something with, let's say, your development team, you might want to have a little bit more detail. That might, include things like what ideas are part of certain initiatives, where they are in terms of, the particular workflow process that you might have set up, because it just gives them a little bit more context around what's happening. So yeah, absolutely, have different formats, have different information, and then you can have one master roadmap that you work out of.
Have you ever run into a situation or seen someone have a problem where they do provide roadmaps to customers and then they start getting behind the eight ball because the customers are viewing those as commitments, that then they're having to scramble to say, oh, well, you said you're going to do X, and I suppose having a timeline on there can exacerbate that problem.
I mean, the reality is, and I'm going to be very honest with this, that even happens if you have a now next later roadmap, because people are going to hyper focus on what they want from what's on there. So I think that just takes a little bit of help from your CS team, from your sales team, from your marketing team. So any team that is very customer facing, have them help you out and have them be able to communicate things like, yes, I know that you're really frustrated with this, but this is what's happened. This is, we have other priorities shift a little bit. So, the customer team is there to help liaise with that relationship. So, at the end of the day, you're one team, you're working together. So work with them to manage that relationship.
I can never remember if my mute's on or not. Once again, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. And we just had one come in. So along the lines of different roadmaps for different audiences and the whole timeline thing, do you have any suggestions, or what have some things that have worked for you to help transition executive teams or maybe even board members who are used to seeing roadmaps with dates, moving them more towards a now next future type of a situation?
That's a great question. The first thing you need to ask yourself, or perhaps ask them, is why they feel they need a timeline. And the usual answer for that is, well, I need to know, X, Y, Z, I need to prepare my team, I need to do this, I need to do that. But I think where it actually comes from is what I like to refer to as previous product trauma, where they've been promised a date, it doesn't happen, they get frustrated, they feel, they have all this pressure. And the only information they've ever been given is that timeline. So that's that trauma of not having that proper two-way relationship with the product team. Now, that doesn't mean that the product team is at fault either, but it's just the way that businesses have worked in the past is very waterfally. And even though it's been, I don't know how many years since Agile now, we still hold on to those old patterns of working. So what I would suggest is establish the level of information that they actually need. So it could be, that usually the C-level executives or your executive board will need things like, why have you chosen to work on things? What's the ROI? What are the OKRs? How is it going to affect the business? What's the, projection for if you're moving to productizing certain areas? What's the projection of revenue that they're going to get? And that is what they like to see. They don't really care about dates. they care about the stuff that's affecting the business. But if dates is the only thing they're used to getting, then it's like this fake security blanket that they hold on to.
All right. It's partial follow-up to that last question. So as you're kind of getting them used to getting situated to a different type of roadmap, how have you found good ways to communicate the fluid changing nature of roadmaps to convince them that just because I showed you this last quarter doesn't mean it's going to be the same next quarter?
Excellent. So one thing that I've experienced before and I put in practice before is remember that the roadmap is not the only document at your disposal. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind. So if you have a roadmap, you're also going to have a release plan. And you should be communicating that release plan often. So while the roadmap is perhaps something that you get up and share and present every, I don't know, entirely random date here, but every quarter or once a month, let's say, share your release plan and talk about what it is that you're actually working on within those releases. My favorite kind of hybrid monster is Scrumban. Obviously a mix of Scrum and Kanban. But a really good way of doing it is when a release actually starts, talk about all the things that you hope to achieve, right? That includes bug fixes, maintenance, improvements, changes, new features, stuff like that. At the end of that cycle or at the end of that sprint, have that conversation again and say, okay, well, this is what we plan to do. This is what we actually achieved, and this is what's coming next on the next cycle. And do that every 2 weeks or every month, whatever, however your cycles work, because obviously it depends. Product management answer. It depends on your own industry and your own company and your own situation. But the more you have those conversations and the more you let people know what the progress actually is, the better they can prepare themselves. And on top of that, the bonus is you actually give the development team the chance to actually show off what they're doing. So it tends to be that teams are pretty siloed, and devs don't really get to talk to customer facing teams so often. So if you have this opportunity to say, this is what we've done, and Kent is going to show off this new feature that he's built, take the opportunity to show it off, and maybe even take the opportunity to take questions from your team so that they get prepared and you actually get some feedback. So it's like a win-win situation right there.
All right. Getting a lot of great questions coming in here now. So I'm going to throw this one out here, and it may be one that we might be able to do now or maybe follow up with some things, but did have a request to see some examples of some roadmaps. I would presume maybe ones that kind of are set up in a now, next, future type setup.
I can do that actually.
Look at that.
Give me a second to get this ready.
This is why we had Andrea on. She's a pro.
1 second. Cool. Let me see. Can I share screen?
Yeah,
I had nope, because you have
oh.
Let's see if you can do it. I'll give you the link and I'll guide you through it.
Here. Try it now. See if you can do it.
Let's see. Oh, I can. Excellent. I believe this is the correct one. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Excellent. So this is this now, next, later format. If anyone wants to check it out, this is something that I built with the ProdPad team. The URL is sandbox.prodpad.com. And it's essentially an interactive space for anyone to jump on there and kind of experience these different types of roadmaps. I'm going to go back a step actually and just show the fact that there's 3 different roadmaps right now for different industries and different teams. So there's an API roadmap, a marketing roadmap, and then the actual SaaS product roadmap. And it's got this now, next, later format. So as you can see, you've got these cards, and these cards are your initiatives. So these are the projects that you're working on. And you'll notice very quickly that the way that they're written down are all very different. So sorry, I'm on a very small screen and I can't see everything. So the ones that are on the now, as I said earlier, you have very defined purpose and a very defined thing that they're doing. So we're going to do this. So provide more educational materials to make it easier for customers to understand Apartment Tracker. That's the app. What comes next is written as a question. So can we reduce the friction by providing users with a quicker and easier sign-up process? We don't know what that looks like. Can we do it? Let's find out. And then on the later, it's written as how can we? So how can we help users understand their data with more useful experts? That doesn't mean that we know what those experts even look like, but we know that we need to fix that problem. So that's how you can start framing things. The colors that you see at the top, the labels, those are your objectives. And then those objectives actually have key results. So for improving the onboarding experience, you have, well, these are the things that we want to do. We want to be able to reduce the onboarding dropout by 10%. We want to increase registrations by 25%. And we want to increase time to conversion by 10%. How are we going to do that? What are the things that, what are the initiatives that actually contribute to this? So this is the type of information that your board is going to care about, particularly if you have things that affect revenue or affect, a reducing churn. That is the information that you should be going to your executives about and saying, these are the things that we're doing. This is what we want to achieve. And then when you are, completing these projects, and I hate using the word justify, but I'm going to use it. When you have to justify whether or not something worked, you can do it in the outcome. So this is why this is also called, let's pick a better example. It's called an outcome-based roadmap because you're focusing on the outcome and what you actually achieve. So on this one, they had a 55% increase in engagement. It went great. And they've had a meeting and they decided to, move this up and try some other things to keep improving. So this is, again, what you can go to your board with and say, this was the outcome of this project. It was great. And this is what we're going to do to be able to replicate it in the future.
All right. Good deal. Thanks for sharing that. When you first started sharing, you mentioned that there were different examples there for different industries. Could you talk a little bit more about how you've seen roadmaps differ for different industries and what are the characteristics that cause those differences, if there are any?
Yeah, so I think particularly for SaaS and maybe even for like when I used to manage the education roadmap, I think you have a little bit more space for experimentation. I think for hardware, there's definitely a lot less space for experimentation, particularly also because of the nature is more waterfall, right? So the difference really lie on whether or not you can actually experiment and if you have space for that. Some people, I mean, at the end of the day, they just like to write, and I did caution against this, we're going to build a Salesforce integration because that's all the information they want to convey. And that's also okay. As I said at the beginning, I might just be a little bit wary around committing to an output too soon. So if you can avoid that, great. If not, it's not really the end of the world, as long as you still have that space to understand the problem that you're trying to solve.
All right. So this question you may have inherently answered by your demo, but by what your example that you showed. But do you have any recommendations on either software or interactive tools that allow for easy building?
So, I mean, my clearly biased opinion is going to be go use ProdPad. However, the most objective answer I can give you is it depends. And it depends on what problem you're trying to solve, right? So the reason that teams tool hop is because they focus on the immediate symptom that they're suffering from, instead of focusing on the actual long-term problem that they can fix. So let's say that the immediate problem is my executives really want me to deliver timelines. I need to deliver timelines. I have a timeline issue. I need software that helps me with timelines. But what is the actual problem? The problem isn't the timeline. The problem is communication. And a tool isn't going to fix that for you. What you want to, oh, sorry, I just saw that pop up again. The URL is prodpad.com/sandbox, if that helps. but back to what I was saying is the problem that you're having is communication, and a tool may not fix that. Not ProdPad, not product board, not roadmap, not whatever else. So perhaps take a step back and address the problem. In this case, it might be there's an issue with your process, and again, a tool is not going to fix your process. So objectively, ProdPad might not be for everyone, particularly if you're still in that transition from more waterfall style and going through that digital transformation. And there are tools that support that. But again, it's, it depends. It depends on where you are on that journey towards hopefully becoming more experiment driven.
So a question with that, and I've gone both ways with discussions about whether does the tool come first or does your approach come first? Which way have you found works best there?
I think the approach, to be honest. And I say this because I can almost say every single startup I've worked at, 10 out of 10, guaranteed, everybody starts with Jira. Why does everybody start with Jira? Because everybody says it's the best tool. And in every single occasion, everybody's moved out of Jira. Not because Jira is a bad tool, because as you grow and as you get to know your team and as you get to know your process, the tool no longer fits your process. So every single time they've moved on to either Trello or Asana or whatever it might be, because Jira has become this monster that just doesn't fit the process anymore. And it just, the team outgrows it. So I would say if you can figure out the process first, then figure out what tool fits your process, but then also makes you a better product manager, makes you a better developer, makes you a better CSM, whatever the situation might be. But don't just have a tool that does the job, but actually helps you be better at the job.
Okay, so following on with that, and it kind of the more on the process and side of things are there some things that product managers should practice either by themselves or with other product managers to get better at road mapping, to get better at establishing and enhancing that process? So some skills behind the tactical creation and use of roadmaps that you would suggest.
Ask the questions. So if you want to get better at building a roadmap, then ask yourself, why are we doing this? And that's like baseline. If you cannot answer the question, why are we doing this? Why is it on your roadmap? The second step would be, okay, if you answer the question of why you're doing it, we are doing this because we want to be able to affect that. How are you measuring that? Do you have a baseline? So a lot of people go, yes, I want to do this because I want to increase, my signups by 50%. Great. Where are you at right now? And what does that end goal actually look like? 50% is a great, key results, but it's a little bit too output focused. So take it beyond that and go, this is my baseline. This is where I want to be. And instead of having OKRs that are output focused, have an OKR that's outcome focused. And that's, OKRs are almost in a way entirely a different topic, but I think the reason OKRs fail is because people tend to either not make them quantitative, and they're measuring the wrong thing, or they're saying something like, I want, to maintain 92% on whatever. That's not an OKR. That's just a standard number. So OKRs are meant to move the needle. So your roadmap should help you move the needle on something. So always make sure that whatever you're doing is not about maintaining something, but it's about, pushing yourself and pushing the product towards that.
So to extend on that a little bit, do you absolutely have to be doing OKRs in order to have an effective outcome-based roadmap?
I would say so, because the point of an outcome is to affect something. If you're not affecting something, then what is your outcome, right? At the very least, have an objective. So have a direction that you're moving towards. Not everybody likes key results. OKRs don't work for everybody, and that's okay. I've worked with teams that had OKRs and failed, and I've worked with teams that never had OKRs, and they're still a success. So that's more of a leadership decision, I would say. But at the very least, have a goal that you want to reach.
All right. Yeah, there's of the various things we've mentioned today, so you mentioned NPS, I think, before we got started, and OKR is another 3-letter acronym that sometimes gets
All the
people riled
acronyms.
up. So all the
Yeah.
TLAs tend to get people fired up. So I had to ask that question. Kaylee mentioned, first of all, thanks for sharing the example. It helped clarify a lot for her. She wanted to follow up a little bit more on what the columns are kind of doing. So here's the question. Understood that now contained solutions, while next contained key business questions. Then she said, believe you said that later contained the how. Could you expand on what moves an idea or initiative from later to next?
Excellent question. So the now represents all the stuff that you have committed resources to. So those are the things that are happening right now. These could be, whatever number of projects that you have. Usually, I mean, again, it depends on the size of your team, but I would say try to not have something like 10 ongoing projects unless you actually have the capacity for 10 ongoing projects. So now is the stuff that's happening now. The next are things that are starting to move into that discovery phase. So you have an idea of what it is that you want to do, but you're still kind of investigating, running prototypes, running usability tests, things like that. Essentially what defines, sorry, I forgot about the how. The how are the things that you want to tackle at some point, but it's the reason why they're written as how might we is because you have no idea what that even looks like, but that it's a problem that you want to solve. So it could be, how might we, allow people to create integrations through a marketplace? I don't know, but it's there. It's something we want to do. It brings us revenue, so let's consider it. What moves things across is essentially the capacity that your team has. So like I said, this is a bit of a difficult question to answer because it'll depend on your own team. But if you have the capacity for 4 projects at a time, then when one moves to completed, then you grab the next one. Now, which one you grab will depend on the impact and effort and the objective that you're currently focusing on. So if on the next column, 3 of the 4 have a different objective than the one that you're currently focusing on, obviously grab the one that meets the current objective. And that's how you kind of start cycling through things. It's from starting from the top, it's really about the objective that you're focusing on.
So a couple of follow-ups on that. So you're effect asking the how might we question to encourage or discourage solutioning too soon, or to broaden the options, really, of saying, here's the problem we're trying to solve. How might we solve that thing? And then leaving it open for the team to kind of figure that out. Is that a fair way of saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I like to write down in questions. So even in the can you do it? I don't know. It might be a terrible idea and it might not even pass, the experimentation phase.
Yeah,
I'll give you
clarify. My question was less about moving from next to now, but more the later to next, because I noticed you had this where you were going, how can we? And then all the ones in next were can we? And I wondered if maybe that was when you were developing what your outcomes were that you were going to focus on, or if there was something that really switched the question from one to the next, and when you were determining what your outcomes were going to.
Yeah, I would say essentially it's how much research you've done at that point. Usually, when you move it, it might still look like how might we when it's in the now, until you get it through, that prototyping, that experimenting, that discovery phase. Once you have a better idea of, can you do something, that's when you switch the question.
Thanks.
And then another thing I wanted to follow up on as you're describing that, to kind of selfishly answer a question I've been having, is so it sounds as though when you talk about capacity, so it's almost as if you're sort of putting work in progress limits on maybe the now column. Do you do the same on the next? And do you throttle how many things are showing up in later as well? Or do you just kind of let that one be wide open?
It depends. And that's going to be my answer for everything now. It depends, again, on what the capacity is. So one thing to think about and to consider, particularly in an agile environment, is that even if you've defined what it is that you want to do and what that solution looks like, it may be a bit much to say, let's do it all at once, because that places you back into being waterfall anyway. So one way to think about it is, what is the minimum viable feature that you can deliver to still, provide value? So let's say that you've decided to build this Salesforce integration. And the minimum you can do on phase one, let's call it, is allow this, ability to send things from one end to the other. But you have a lot of other things that you want to do. But realistically, you want to be able to put this out because it's going to get you more revenue immediately. Start with that. That's your minimum viable feature. As you go, you're still going to be putting through these improvements, but maybe categorize them into, phase one, phase two, phase three. And then inevitably, as you go, you're going to be, gathering more and more and more feedback. It doesn't mean that that feedback needs to be pushed all the way to the end, but it may also still align with some of the things that you want to do anyway. So it's almost supporting that case for doing all those other things anyway. It could also be that you entirely pivot at some point and somebody gives you, or a few people give you feedback that means that you can, develop something within that feature that actually provides even more value. And that's how pivoting happens, right? And that's also why you should never consider anything on your product to be done, is because you're always going to be making improvements, or you're always going to be moving forward. But yeah, I think the realistic thing is to develop phases if you can.
All right. So question that came up that was referring back to a discussion a minute or so ago. So we were talking about asking questions like, how might we and can we?
I saw that one.
When do you ask, should we?
Excellent question. So the first time you should ask, should we, is if that initiative meets your objective. If it doesn't meet your current objective, then no, you should not do it. The second is, does it fit your vision? So I'm sure it comes to no surprise when I say that at ProdPad, everybody was asking for timelines. Should we do it because people are asking for it? No, it's not within the vision of the company. So why would we do it? But we still keep the feedback because feedback is really valuable in trying to understand, as I said, those symptoms that people are having. So what can we actually provide that help those symptoms? It's like saying you're developing MailChimp and people are asking for chats. Is that within the vision of MailChimp? Likely not. So why would you do it? And then I think the third sort of battlefront, so to speak, would be the discovery phase. If it doesn't pass discovery, then no, you should still not do it.
Do you have a mechanism in there to, while you're in the midst of delivering, to ask that question in the form of, should we keep doing this? And have you ever run across a situation where you got halfway into it and you realized, oh, wait a second, met the mission, met the vision, but it just isn't working for us? And how'd you handle that?
Well, I wasn't me that handled it, but I'll give you a really great example of that. So many years ago, this was, I don't want to age myself too much, but about 11 years ago, because we're 2021 now, I was hired to do support at this company because that's how I started out. I started in support. And in my first 2 weeks, I noticed that what the team was doing is they had this really stable application. It was developed in .NET, if anyone wants to laugh at that. And then they were developing a new version of the application, and it was written in Angular 1. They had been doing this for 3 years because, for anybody that knows Angular, every 6 months there's a new version and none of the versions connect to each other. And so they had been developing this new version, but the new version wasn't even for the same target audience. It was for an entirely different vertical. And so I'm asking all these questions and I'm getting to know the team, I'm getting to know the product. And so I walk into my CEO's office and I'm like, hey, so can I ask you a question? Why do we have 2 products that do exactly the same thing, But when it's been in development for 3 years, wouldn't it just be simpler to like market it to different verticals? That kind of makes more sense, right? And he like cursed in a million French words, and he gets up and he goes to the development team and he's like, we're shutting this down right now. And then he turns around and he's like, you're making decisions from now on. And that's how I became a product manager. Literally, nobody had questioned him in 3 years. They had wasted time, they had wasted money, they had wasted resources. And it took me, someone that didn't even really know the product that well, to say, so why is this happening right now? And he just went, I have no idea. He didn't even know anymore.
So there you go. There's the ultimate path to success to becoming a product manager. Right
Ask
there.
questions.
Ask questions.
Ask why. That is the only path. That's the only job you have, is to ask why. Somebody once told me, to his credit, he was a great manager, but he was not a product person. And he said, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. That is the worst advice I ever got, because as a product manager, it's not really your job to find the solution. It's your job to ask why, identify the problem, and then tap into the resources that you have around you to figure out what the best solution might be. That solution might come from your customer success manager. Oops, that is my dog barking. Give me 1 second. The joys of working from home is having a barking dog that will not shut up. Come here. Come here. Thank you. Be grouchy right there. So as I was saying, that solution might come from CSMs, might come from the developers, it might come from your sales team, it might come from your marketing team. There's a wealth of knowledge around you. So tap into that knowledge. And that is the best thing. I apologize. Someone is at my door. I'm gonna have to go take that unexpected visitor. Give me a second.
All right. This is the great value of Zoom meetings. So we have now officially entered 2021. So again, as we're waiting for Andrea to get back, if you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We've been getting some great questions up to this point. So got a couple on queue, but if you have anything you would like to ask, please put them in the chat and I'll be looking for them.
I have myself an unexpected Amazon delivery. I do apologize for that.
It's the way things are these days, right?
It's almost 7 o'clock. That's a very dedicated person.
They got to get the deliveries in. All right. So I wanted to kind of circle back a little bit. So we were talking about trying to get people in your organization to accept going away from timelines and going more to a outcome focused now, next, later type of roadmap. Question that came about is Max mentioned that he's had some experience with teams going through that process, coming away with a great roadmap, and then things start to backslide, right? So they start to go back to the way things were. Higher ups continue to ask for things that focus more on timelines and outputs, I think he meant there. Do you have an example from your experience where you've been able to overcome that issue, or a similar one where things have, you were able to make a change, but then things started to backslide?
I mean, I think I've just been really lucky that I worked at a product company that built software for product people and roadmaps. The very made a thing we were talking about before. But I have definitely had the experience of people joining the team that didn't have a product experience, and they kept pushing for timelines and they kept trying to know things. And, when is this coming? And when is this coming? And when is this coming? And the reality is we don't know. I was talking to someone, if anyone is on Reddit, who was saying they keep pushing for timelines, the same question. And I'm like, well, is that actually the problem? Do they actually need the timeline, or is there some sort of breakdown in communication? Because again, a timeline is fake. We all know that. Like whatever date we give, it's not going to be respected anyway, because things happen. So I think the best way to go about that is listen to what problem they're actually having and what they're experiencing and what their frustration is. And I find that a lot of the time, yes, it can be really frustrating when someone's asking you for a timeline all the time. But if that communication isn't there, as product managers, we do have to take a little bit of responsibility and say what's lacking here. why are they frustrated? And we talk a lot about product managers, developing empathy and practicing empathy. And that is a very difficult thing to do, particularly when you're in an environment that's so stressful, right? And people are always pushing you for things. So instead of saying, oh, well, my sales team is always selling things that I don't have, or my marketing team is sales, all that typical stuff, I've experienced it as well. Kind of go, okay, well, why is this happening? And sit down with them. And I know meetings suck sometimes, but sometimes that's what you need to do, is have the meetings, have those retrospectives, have that sprint kickoff. And what really helped at ProdPad to keep everybody aligned is everybody had to be at that sprint meeting. Everybody in the company, down to the HR person, like everybody had to be there, so that everybody understood what was happening and why. So yes, you have that roadmap meeting, but then also keep people up to date with that, ongoing development.
So you mentioned the kind of the timing of having everyone touch base at a sprint cycle. I presume somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks. One question we had in here is how often do you proactively share your roadmap out company-wide? So it might be kind of adding onto that, or even widely in general. So what's the frequency that you found to be good there?
I would say, your roadmap should always be available all the time, always. Everybody should have access to it. If you're keeping your roadmap hidden, do you really expect people to just remember everything that's there? I don't even know what's on my own roadmap. So why would someone else, right? So if they see it once and then don't see it again for another 3 months, that might be a problem. That's a communication problem. So I always have it there, always have it available. How often you present it, again, depends on your team, depends on how often that roadmap is changing. I would say at least once every quarter, just to make sure, particularly if you're having 4-week cycles, everybody should be up to date with what's happening. But have that roadmap meeting, once every quarter seems reasonable.
I want to follow up on something you mentioned in there as far as making sure you're not hiding it, so it's always available. And I've tried to definitely go that route. One thing I've found though is that sometimes people don't avail themselves of the information that's available to them. Have you run into that situation, and what have you done to kind of encourage people to go help themselves, as it were?
Make it easy. So at ProdPad, we had the roadmap both in ProdPad, obviously, but also on the website. So there were no excuses. Everybody has access to the website. It's there. And everybody had to be at the sprint meetings as well. Like, it was a mandatory thing. I have experienced the opposite end of things when I was a support team member, when I had the roadmap shared like once a year. I had no idea what was happening. Neither did the developers. They were just developing things. So there was a complete lack of communication there. And then when I was a product manager, I did talk to everyone, every quarter, and everybody had access to it as well. We actually had it on a whiteboard, big whiteboard, lots of sticky notes. And it was just there all the time for everybody to look at least, on a higher level. We didn't necessarily show on the roadmap at that point in time the details of all the ideas and the workflows. That was more on the Jira side. I was a Jira user, my fault. I also made the mistake. But having it on the whiteboard, certainly helped everybody in the team.
All right, so another sort of question tied to timing, and this is, when do you decide to reshuffle or add new items to the roadmap, and does that trigger a new kind of cycle of letting people know about it, or what's your experience been there?
Again, it depends. There is no, bulletproof way to say this, but certainly if things are changing quite quickly, then have once-a-month meetings, so that you can communicate at the very least what that change is. And if you're having those, cycle kickoff meetings, hopefully, they will know. But if there is a strategic change, then yes, obviously communicate the strategic change, or the new initiative as soon as possible. One thing that just popped into my head, one thing that has really helped me is when you start a new initiative, make sure that you outline what it is about and what it is not about. So establish very quickly, this project is about achieving this. It is not about achieving this. because some people, and this is natural, they might rely on their imagination and they might jump ahead and say, this is what I want, or this is what I'm expecting. So particularly when it still kicks off, or it's, on that discovery phase where you still don't even know, make sure that you establish, this is the exact outcome, or this is what we're hoping to achieve, but this is not what we're hoping to achieve. So this is not part of the plan.
All right. And no discussion would be complete without a discussion of budget and funding. So the next question. When you have an outcome-based roadmap, what does it look like to manage the budget and funding? Is it project waterfall cost management tied to initiatives in now or next, or some other mechanism to make sure the things you're doing are getting paid for?
Oof, it depends. I don't really have an answer for that, because it really depends on the size of your team. It depends on your capacity. And sometimes that budgeting will happen on the development side and will happen from the technical side of things. But again, sometimes product managers wear both the product and the project hat, in which case you're then also responsible for the budgeting side of things. I have experienced more of we know this is what we want to do. It's spec'd out. You decide how that happens and what your capacity is. It worked really well, but that doesn't mean that formula works for everyone. And I would be giving you the wrong advice if I spoke incorrectly on that front. So I don't know, Kent, if you have any feedback on that.
Well, I was wondering if you or anyone is running across a situation where effectively the teams are pretty much saying we are committed to having teams budgeted out for a year, and then it's just a matter of what we're using the roadmap for is decide what particularly they're working on. So it's not a matter that each individual initiative has to grab funding for it. It's more along the lines of, does this warrant spending these people's time working on this particular thing or not? So the budgeting is more done that way.
So I think, that comes from, again, your objectives and what problems you're solving. So is it worth it? You should be able to answer that before you've even said anything to development. And that's why you're asking, what problem are we trying to solve and why? Like that should be answered straight away. So I'll give you an example. There was this project that we wanted to do. And the CEO was super sure everybody wanted it, like 100% sure. I don't need to ask anyone. I'm like, why don't we just ask, just in case? It was prototyped, and then it went on to gather feedback, and nobody wanted it. And I was like, see, we could have amounted to massive amounts of tech debt, and wasted time, and wasted resources, and probably could have lost money not doing something that could have actually brought us money. This is why we ask questions. Now, oddly enough, and here's where it depends comes, back to haunt us. We put it in archive, so we archived it. We didn't delete it, but we froze it to at least understand if we ever came across it again, why we chose not to do it. And it's one of those feature requests that every so often comes back and comes back and comes back. So it could just be that your audience isn't ready for it at that point in time. So you also have to consider, when you're managing a product, the growth that you are at, but also the growth that your customers are at. Because the longer period of time that you have your customers, the more savvy they get. So it could be that they're not ready for that at that point in time, but they may be ready for it later. Top tip.
All right, very good. We have one more question. This will be the last one, and then we'll do a couple of real quick closing announcements. Referring back to your love of Jira. Will's asking, which tool did you decide to move on to from Jira? And was the move just for the product team or for the development team as well?
Cool question. I have moved to both Asana on one direction and then Trello on the other direction. For both occasions, both worked really well, not just for the dev team, but for everybody. And that, I think, is the benefit of having a tool that's really, really easy to use, that has tasks that can be moved across multiple teams and that multiple team members can contribute to. So remember that having a task to do is not the same as having an idea or a problem to solve. So it could be that me, Andrea, has a task, that I have to do for whatever, and I need help from someone in the dev team or someone in the design team. I can very easily just go, hey, I need this very quick design, or I need help with this. Can you just, double check it, blah, blah, blah. Grab someone from content or grab someone from the marketing team and just go, can you check, that my grammar is correct? Put them on the ticket. They'll check it really quick. Great, done, move it, done. That's it. No fuss. No, you don't have to waste, hours and hours and hours trying to get people to learn a tool that they don't know and try to guide them to the right place. And particularly when, and I'm sorry to, keep banging on to Jira, but Jira is not an easy to use tool. There's so much happening. Trello and Asana are a lot easier to use. It's super easy to, get on there, find your task, do it, and then, drag and drop, you're done. So ease of use is definitely a factor that you should consider. And then if you can have multiple team members on there, it's just, I think it's a no-brainer.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Thanks everybody for all your great questions. Thanks, Andrea, for all of your great answers. And it depends and all that stuff.
It depends.
If anyone has any questions for you afterward, what's the best way to get in touch with you to ask those questions?
Yes, I am very active on Twitter. So my handle is, I'll just write it on the chat, actually. It might be easier to try to. That is me.
Okay.
So you can follow me on Twitter, and if you want to add me on LinkedIn, it's just Andrea and then the Saez.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Just a reminder again, this is been recorded, so we'll get it posted up here and then shortly after this, probably give me a day or two. Also wanted to mention that we do have our next session scheduled. So on Thursday, April 8th, again, over the lunch hour in Central Iowa time. We're going to be learning about jobs to be done with Mike Belcito from Product Collective. So should be a good session. I won't lie, I'm kind of picking some topics that I'm interested in learning more about. So this is a great one. So April 8th, Mike Belcito from Product Collective talking about jobs to be done. And there'll be an announcement coming out about that with more specifics. So I just want to close up. Thanks again, Andrea, and appreciate you spending your evening with us while we're over our lunch hour.
I do apologize again for the Amazon interruption.
Oh, no worries. It made it real. It made it real.
Right.
So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.